Think you've got your super sorted? You might be making costly mistakes without even knowing it. Super is often your biggest asset outside your home, but time and time again, I see people making the same basic errors, and these can have an immediate impact on your hip pocket. In this video, I'll discuss the 6 most common mistakes that I've seen Australians make as a financial advisor, and stick around to the end when I'll explain the one thing that is holding Australian retirees back year after year after year. Now, the first mistake I want to talk about, and it happens all too often, and I see it in my business, in my financial advice business all the time, is people chasing last year's best performing super fund or last year's best performing investment. And as the ads say it, and every advisor does as well, though it doesn't help, is past performance is no guarantee of future performance. Yet every single day I meet clients who have picked the top performing super fund of last year and are either disappointed or just expect that great return from the previous year to continue. Or in another case, and what I see quite often, is people comparing their performance of their super fund to the best performing super fund of the previous year, which is clearly an unfair comparison. And it's unfair in my view, because there is massive divergence between the best performing and the worst performing super fund. Industry funds on their own, on 3-year returns, the lowest return over 3 years was 0.68% according to APRA's heat map, and the best return was 6.55%. That is a huge divergence, a huge gap, and there's hundreds of super funds that sit in there. So just picking the best one of last year doesn't mean it's going to be the best one of next year. And I think one of the keys here is that when you're selecting an investment or a superannuation fund, whether that's an industry fund or running your own self-managed super fund, it needs to be about more than just investing. You need to ensure your super fund's aligned with your goals and objectives, and most importantly, the investment option you're choosing is what you need to deliver the outcomes that you want. You don't need the best return. You don't need the best returning fund every year. And generally, if a fund is performing well one year, it's unlikely to perform well the next, because circumstances change. We only need to look at what's happened in 2025 or even 2024 to know that there's huge variability in the returns of different super funds. The questions I always ask are, do you value transparency or do you value control? And in my experience, those entering retirement want a little bit of both, which isn't always available with every superannuation fund. But more importantly, make sure you're doing the research and doing some analysis to find out whether, one, your investment option is suited to you, one, your fund is at least getting the average or the median return that everyone else is. The second mistake I see all too often is people neglecting non-concessional contributions. Now, we all tend to get the need or benefit of concessional contributions. And just to recap, a concessional contribution is one that's made by your employer, so a superannuation guarantee or a salary sacrifice contribution, or a contribution from your after-tax savings that you're able to claim a tax deduction on. Now, the limit of these is $30,000 a year, and the tax rate is 15%, so there's a contributions tax rate of 15%. In most cases, even younger people in their 30s and 40s are well aware of the benefits of a concessional contribution, but all too often I meet people who don't understand the benefit of a non-concessional contribution. And this is probably an issue with the industry and the complexity of superannuation. So a non-concessional contribution is an after-tax contribution generally made from your savings. Now, interestingly, they don't attract any tax when they go into your fund, and they form part of your tax-free component when you're withdrawing money from your fund after you turn 60 or 65, as we've covered in previous videos. They are actually the easiest and fastest way to get money into super, but they tend to be forgotten. As a refresher, you can make $120,000 per person per year in non-concessional contributions, or bring forward 2 years worth and make $360,000 in a single year. And most importantly, you can keep doing this until you turn 75 without having to meet a works test. Why is this important? We know the tax benefits of investing via superannuation, and this is the fastest, lowest cost way of getting money into there. The third one I want to talk about, and this has become increasingly scary, is thinking you can access your superannuation early. I say scary because there is quite a lot of predatory behavior and scams around this at the moment, or they tend to pop up quite regularly or from time to time. What you see is a growing number of advertisements and groups soliciting you can get early access to your super. It could be on social media, it could be cold calling you out of the blue, and essentially they promise to help you get money out of your super, and allowing you to use it for anything you want. And given we have little connection with our super, that I kind of get the understanding that maybe we'd be able to use it for something else. But this is the biggest no-no when it comes to super. The purpose of your superannuation is to provide an income in retirement. If you breach this sole purpose, you can be up for massive taxation bills and massive costs. There are only a few ways you can access your super money appropriately. That is by meeting a condition of release. So that's turning 60 and ceasing some sort of work, or turning 65 and not having to meet any other requirement once you turn 65. There are also very limited ways you can access if you're in financial hardship, where you can apply to the trustee of your superannuation fund if you're struggling on mortgages, have medical treatment, some of the smaller, more important ways you can access that, and then also on medical or TPD claims. But there are no other legitimate ways to access your superannuation early other than meeting one of these conditions of release. So be very aware of these things. The fourth mistake I want to talk about is switching investment options. And of all the mistakes we talk about, this one is probably the most impactful and the one that can have the biggest impact on your hip pocket. It's also one that a financial advisor or anyone that's providing help with your superannuation can tend to help the most with. It's also incredibly difficult to quantify the benefits. So what I'm saying here is do not switch your investment options because you feel like you need to protect what you have left. Similarly, don't switch your investment options if that idea is triggered by what's happening in markets, like what's been happening in 2025, 2024, basically every year before. If you're reacting to what you're reading in the news or listening to on the radio or podcasts or social media, this is not the framework through which you should be making a decision to sell your investment options. And when I refer to switching your investment options, in general, this is a decision that I see made all too often, which is we've got a fairly growth-oriented portfolio, and that's impacted by volatility because of new policy. Markets are volatile by their nature, and once the market falls by 10 or 20%, which is common, can happen at least once a year, if not once every couple of years, people feel the need to sell and go into more defensive assets. This is what I talk about when I say don't switch investment options. Yes, there might be value in moving between international shares or Australian shares and different asset classes, but making a big asset allocation long-term decision on a short-term feeling or sentiment is the wrong decision. In my view, volatility is the price of admission, and because it allows you to generate an income that you need, but also to ensure your capital will remain intact throughout your retirement. That is, by accepting volatility, by investing into more growth-oriented assets, it allows you to generate a higher income than you otherwise could, but also have the potential to grow your portfolio and ensure that you don't outlast your money outlasts you. Now, I'll give you an example where this is a case of what actually happened with one of our clients. They had two superannuation funds held with an industry fund in growth-oriented, so high growth or balanced growth investments. They were worried that the market was falling. And for those who remember, in 2020, the market fell something like 25 to 30% in just a few weeks. Naturally, they wanted to switch their growth allocation into more defensive assets like bonds, cash, all these sort of things, and solely because they made one statement, that is, I need to protect what I have left. Our advice, as always, was do not switch. Do not make the reason that you're switching, because we know the importance of remaining invested over the long term and what happens in terms of missing the best returning days if you're selling out on the worst performing days. Unfortunately, the client switched one of their super funds, but not the other. The result was that fund barely changed, and it was almost something like 100% difference in return. That was a better return that was achieved by the fund that didn't switch when the market got volatile. Make sure you have a framework to make decisions. Advisors can help a lot with this, but you can build your own framework and make sure you're not reacting to short-term events with what is an incredibly long-term pool of retirement savings that you're dealing with. The fifth and the second last one I want to talk about is so many people forget to nominate their beneficiaries for their superannuation assets. And this couldn't be more relevant with all the talk about industry super funds, the fines and the court cases around the time that it takes to pay death benefits out to the beneficiaries of superannuants or retirees that have passed away. The key here is that your superannuation fund is not an estate asset. That means it doesn't automatically go into your will. In order to ensure your superannuation assets, which as we were talking about before, are one of the biggest, if not the second biggest asset you'll have in retirement, you need to complete a binding death nomination. And this is quite a simple form that is provided by every type of superannuation fund, whether that's a self-managed fund, an industry fund, or a corporate super fund. This is the only way you can ensure it is paid as you wish. And only certain people can receive these death benefits: children, partners, husbands, wives, and financial dependents. This needs to be done properly or it isn't active and needs to be witnessed, but all that information is available on the form for each superannuation fund. It's also worth noting that you can direct your superannuation assets into your will, but it needs to be elected to be paid to your legal personal representative. Now, if this isn't done properly, your beneficiaries will need to apply to the super fund, and this can take months and months and can also be subject to a lot of uncertainty and a lot of work. So I think the key here is always have your death benefit nomination in place. Make sure you're reviewing this every 3 years, and also ensure you've got a will in place that considers your superannuation and, if possible, as deemed appropriate. The final one I want to talk about is so many people in this environment, and there's just been this historical focus on it, is that believing the lowest fees always equal the better outcomes. I've flagged this before. The performance differential between the best performing super fund and the worst performing super fund is huge. And there's an old saying that if the product is free or very, very low cost, then you may be the product. Now, we're all well attracted to low fees, but this doesn't always pay off in investing. Not every market is efficient, and we don't always want the lowest cost option in all conditions. Now, low cost in investing generally means indexing. And what does an index return mean? An index return means that you're always getting the average. You're never going to do better than the average. You're never going to do worse than the average. That means if the share market falls 25% in 3 weeks, you're going to get a 25% fall in 3 weeks. Now, this might be great when times are good, like the last few years, but not necessarily the best outcome when times are like today. Just getting the lowest cost option does not necessarily help in smoothing the ride and smoothing the experience. And in my experience, what matters most in retirement is reducing that volatility, not taking more risk than you need to, and ultimately smoothing both the income and growth potential that you have. There's a number of other issues here, which is around excessive indexing in inefficient markets can result in significantly poor outcomes, and also, good advice, whether that is at an asset allocation level or an investment level, comes at a cost. It doesn't mean you should have the most expensive super fund or the least expensive. It's more about knowing what you're invested into and whether that's appropriate to your objectives and the goals that you want, and also the level of volatility and risk that you need to accept in order to generate the returns that you like. Now, I said I'd have one last mistake that I see all too often, and I've spoken about this in previous videos, but it's so many people forget to draw their pension. Once you turn 60, if you stop any sort of work, you can access your pension. That turns your entire superannuation fund into a tax-free structure. Once you turn 65, you can also commence a pension. You need to go out and talk to your superannuation fund. It could be talk to your accountant if you're a self-managed super fund, or going to your industry, calling your industry fund and getting the appropriate form. But you can save a significant amount of tax if you commence a pension at the first opportunity. And this is something that the data reports continue to show is done far too little and takes so many people far too long. So once again, if you appreciate this video, please review, please subscribe to our channel, and please send through any questions that you have. Thank you.